After 146 hours of playing Red Dead Redemption 2, which I edited into 72 episodes of gameplay videos with a total viewing time of 59 hours, I reached the end of Arthur's story. I was satisfied with the ending, but there were a few problems I had with the plot, and I wanted to discuss them. Needless to say, this video is going to contain spoilers for Red Dead Redemption 2. So without further ado, let's talk about the big plot twist.
Because it seems to me that since you've been riding with us, there ain't been nothing but trouble. Stirring things up all the time, getting in Dutch's ear. Seems wherever you is, there's Pinkertons and vice versa. So you better watch your goddamn mouth, boy!
The idea that the real traitor was Micah is not too far-fetched, but to say that he only turned on the gang after Guarma is just dumb. There were too many obvious clues that someone had been betraying the group since the botched robbery at Blackwater. Detective Milton had no reason to lie when he told Arthur that Molly never turned on the gang, and Micah only turned on the gang after Guarma, but that means that the Pinkerton detectives somehow were ready for the gang when they robbed the bank in Saint Denis. Maybe they were smart enough to figure out the gang's next move after they kidnapped Angelo Bronte. However, they also managed to nab Hosea as he was creating a distraction in a different part of the city. The Pinkertons had to be in two places at once. They had to know where Hosea and Abigail were going to create the distraction to be able to capture Hosea, and they had to know the real target was the bank to show up there immediately after. If they were really that good, they would have caught Dutch Vanderlyn a long time before. The only explanation that makes sense is someone tipped them off. You could assume that the botched robbery in Blackwater was just bad luck. It could have been mere coincidence that a bunch of Pinkerton detectives showed up out of nowhere, and not because of a snitch. But what about the train robbery with John? It was planned to take place in a remote area where it would take the law a long time to show up. But somehow a horde of lawmen happened to appear. The newspaper article referring to the robbery says, in so many words, that the law had been tipped off about the robbery. Who tipped them off? The theory that there was an informant in the gang the whole time explains everything that ever went wrong with the gang. For Micah to have turned informant only after returning from Guarma turns all the clues that there had been a traitor in the gang into red herrings. The only thing Micah could have done to betray the gang after Guarma was tell the Pinkertons where the gang's new hideout was. No other gang operations after Guarma appeared to have been compromised by an informant. Lenny and Hosea's death weren't his fault. Molly O'Shea did not get killed for something Micah did. Sean's death, Kieran's death, had nothing to do with Micah. Micah's a mean and selfish bastard, but he didn't cause all the bad luck the gang had suffered for the entire story. The only gang members who died because of Micah were Susan Grimshaw and Arthur, after he accused Micah of being a rat. If Arthur hadn't confronted Micah, Susan and Arthur wouldn't have died either. This is the big thing about the story that I have a problem with. It would have been so simple to fix. If Milton and Ross recruited Micah and Valentine around the same time they first met Arthur, then the whole plot makes a lot more sense. It seems reasonable that the reason Milton and Ross found Arthur in the first place is they were watching Valentine in the area around it for people from Vanderlyn's gang. They could easily have found and attempted to recruit others in the gang like Micah. Heck, they could have even recruited him when he got arrested in Strawberry, before Arthur busted him out. Then the only red herring is the botched riverboat robbery in Blackwater. Everything else that goes wrong could have been attributed to Micah. Then the player has a real justification for hating the guy.
Okay, Mr. Milton, where are you?
Don't even think that way, Arthur. He's got plot armor. Another issue I had with the story was Milton and Ross. Because Ross is in the previous game, and Milton was destined to die near the end of Chapter 6, both characters had plot armor. Multiple times they were in situations where they should have been killed, but they survived only for reasons of story continuity. The first time they should have been killed was when they confronted Dutch at Clemens Point. I went on a half-hour rant about that when it happened. I mean, I got a better deal. We shoot you where we stand, and we live on. Why not we do that? How did these guys get into the camp armed? I'd like to know. How is this a thing? How are we allowing them to talk right now? How is that a thing? Why are we not shooting them dead where they stand? I don't understand. I truly don't understand what's happening right here. Then you see Milton again outside the Saint Denis bank as he shoots Hosea. But as soon as Arthur and the rest of the gang start shooting from the bank, Milton has magically vanished from the street. This happens again when the Pinkertons attack the gang at Lakay. Milton was there, standing near the Gatling gunner giving a monologue, as Arthur and Sadie snuck up to their flank and then burst out of a house to open fire. Suddenly, Milton's nowhere to be seen as the gang fights the rest of the Pinkerton detectives in a massive gun battle. When and how did Milton escape?
Yes, sir.
We are doing all we can within the confines of the law.
The law? I think we both know what you can do with your law. Find me Dutch Vanderlyn. Bring him here. And leave the laws to them as need them. Good day, sir.
Come along, Mr. Ross. We have work to do.
Another time Milton and Ross should have died was when Dutch went to Annesburg to confront Leviticus Cornwall. Just before Dutch revealed himself, Milton and Ross meet with Mr. Cornwall to discuss their progress. Then Dutch confronts Cornwall seconds after the detectives walk away. In the ensuing gunfight through the town, there are Pinkerton detectives involved, but somehow Milton and Ross manage to avoid the fray. They're nowhere to be seen. The idea of having a villain reveal himself and then leave to let his minions do the fighting so that he can appear later in the story can work, but you have to be careful not to overuse it. It didn't bother me when Leviticus Cornwall did it once. Heck, he's just a businessman. All that shooty, gun-bangy stuff he leaves to his lessers. But it shreds plausibility when Milton and Ross do it over and over again. Those two detectives carry guns, but always manage to not be there when the bullets start flying. Milton shooting Hosea is the one and only time either Milton or Ross fires a shot in the entire story. One last thing I wanted to bring up. It's really a small thing. Almost nobody would notice and fewer would care. Heck, I don't even care. But I think it's interesting to talk about. It has to do with Colonel Favors attempting to arrest Captain Monroe. Red Dead Redemption 2 is praised for its attention to detail and historical accuracies, and rightly so, but they kinda took some liberties with this. I read a book called Tarnished Eagles by Thomas Lowry. I'll try to put a link in the description. It describes 50 examples of courts-martial for colonels and lieutenant colonels during the Civil War. It gave me an understanding about how a court-martial worked in the 19th century American Army. Today, a court-martial more closely resembles a civilian trial, with a judge and jury and rules of evidence. It was not like that in 1899.
So, this Colonel Favors, he knows you're up here helping these people?
Yes. And no. He knows I'm here to produce a report on the situation. I was sent down from the north after all the news of unrest in the region. But I think my presence might be making things worse.
What do you mean?
I worry he's taking some of these actions more to protect himself now. If he can incite more retaliation, maybe he can prove a stronger defense.
Well, like destroying that shrine.
Yes, and taking their horses. I mean, I don't know if he personally sanctioned any of this or not. This is the other problem. There's a culture now in his regiment. Rot has traveled down the trunk.
In those days, there were two types of court-martial, regimental and general. Colonel Favors only had the authority to order a regimental court-martial. This type of court-martial consisted of 3 officers who acted as a panel of judges. It could be used only for cases involving non-officers for non-capital offenses. In order to court-martial an officer or any soldier where there was a potential for a sentence of death, a general court-martial was required. Only a general officer could order a general court-martial. It would be made up of 13 officers, none of which could be inferior in rank to the officer being court-martialed. In theory, there could be other captains administering Captain Monroe's court-martial, but they would have to have held their rank longer than Captain Monroe. This would have made it extremely impractical to hold a court-martial for Monroe at Fort Wallace, as there would not likely be enough officers in the regiment of sufficient rank who weren't also witnesses. Colonel Favors absolutely had the power to arrest Captain Monroe and charge him with various offenses, but to actually hold a court-martial, Colonel Favors would have to send the information up the chain of command to his commanding officer, who would likely be a general in Washington, D.C. Captain Monroe would be confined to his quarters until the matter was resolved. Colonel Favors' commanding officer would then have the power to order a court-martial or dismiss the charges. He likely would order the court-martial, but it would be held in Washington and run by officers who were experienced at doing courts-martial and likely not biased in favor of the colonel. The irony that Colonel Favors arrested the man responsible for investigating his command would not be lost on the officers running the court-martial. I would also like to point out that Colonel Favors was not Monroe's commanding officer. Captain Monroe was given orders from someone in Washington, likely in the office of the Inspector General. Monroe's CO would definitely still expect a report from him in spite of what happened, and you can bet they would be very curious to see what was in that report at the court-martial. By arresting Monroe and confining him to his quarters, it gets him out of the colonel's hair temporarily, but it's bound to cause the colonel a lot of trouble in the long run. Captain Monroe knows how all this works. He's a West Point graduate who likely works for the Inspector General in Washington. That's why when Arthur overreacted and took a hostage, Monroe should have sided with Colonel Favors and let himself be arrested. By running away with Arthur and Charles and being involved in that shootout, even though he personally didn't shoot anybody, Captain Monroe really doomed himself. Other than things I just mentioned, I've really enjoyed the story. I'm still playing through the epilogue at this time. I'm a little disappointed that I never found out what happened to Jack's dog or who smashed the donation box, but it's still possible that this is yet to be revealed. There also may have been some explanation to those little details that I simply missed. Heck, maybe I'll find out before the end credits that Tilly Jackson was the snitch the whole time, and I'll have to take back everything I just said. Be sure to watch my future gameplay episodes and find out with me on Amon Chooses Red Dead Redemption 2.